The Voice campaign has ended, and until recently, so too has media interest in Indigenous affairs. Go figure, wouldn't it be great if we could get all that political willpower, activism and funding to back evidence-based solutions for Indigenous Australians? Prime Minister Albanese has recently expressed support for a proposal for economic development through Indigenous communities being involved in things like renewable projects. The proponents of this proposal believe this will help Indigenous communities move in the direction of private enterprise. So, let's talk about the road ahead for Indigenous policy. We need reforms in 4 key areas. 1. Economic participation. Imagine if the government gave you a glass of nothing and made it illegal for you to fill it with water. That's what's happening with Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians aren't allowed to build on their land. For remote Indigenous Australians, land is collectively owned by centralised Indigenous bodies. Indigenous people cannot own their own home and are dependent on centralised, community-controlled organisations for housing, income and other daily needs, and so they live in abject poverty. Collective ownership of resources has never worked, so let's allow private property and ensure that the only thing red in Australia is the outback land, not the economy. 2. Education. State and territory governments are responsible for ensuring all children attend school. But school attendance is so low in remote communities that when the federal government stepped in to drive up the attendance, the teachers went on strike. God forbid people do their job. The state and territory governments take no accountability and consistently put their hand out for more federal funds. Some of the time, the money is never seen in remote communities. The NT government has been criticised for diverting federal funding intended for remote communities to Darwin, described by The Australian as the greatest scandal in contemporary Aboriginal affairs. Let's ensure that the kids in remote areas are in school and not wandering the streets. 3. Crime. In Alice Springs, instead of going to school, kids have hit the streets, leading to a severe youth crime crisis and the unprecedented enforcement of a 6 p.m. curfew. It's not working. Indigenous children need alternatives to a life of mischief and crime. They need safe places to go, education and training opportunities, and more constructive ways to spend their time and energy. 4. Accountability and governance. The justice and welfare systems must be reformed to ensure responsible governance with transparency and clear targets. Do the job you were hired to do and don't just hire more bureaucrats and call it a day. If we focus on these 4 areas, we could improve the lives of Indigenous Australians. Capitalism and free market economies have brought prosperity to the majority of Australia, and yet we are leaving Indigenous Australians behind. The current system robs us of opportunities through paternalistic and bureaucratic policies. It's time to close the gap once and for all.